Hello and welcome to another edition of Only in Illinois, your weekly video recap from Reboot Illinois. I'm Matt Dietrich and I'm here in the state capitol. I'm joined tonight by Amanda Vinicky, State House Bureau Chief for NPR Illinois. And we just wrapped up the second week of the fall veto session. The General Assembly is now adjourned until possibly January 9th if they have any kind of a lame duck session. But really, this final 3 days of the veto session was really pretty dramatic, and especially today. And it started out in very dramatic fashion with another one of these leaders' meetings that they seem to have every day, and then we all sort of congregate outside the governor's office and wait for him to come out and say what they are going to say, what they met about. But we had some surprises today, didn't we, Amanda?
Exactly. Normally, it's the same old rigmarole pretty much every day. As you noted, reporters hang out, we wait, we chat for the leaders to come out. They give their reaction, and that reaction has really been a whole lot of same old, with Speaker Madigan saying we should follow the framework of not including quote-unquote turnaround agenda items on passage of any budgetary bills, and that's how we'll get a budget, and Republicans saying Madigan is being a stick in the mud for reform that will help Illinois long-term. But what we got different this time around was word from Senate President John Cullerton that supposedly in this meeting, the governor had, and this is where it really is kind of confusing, and I think part of this may have been a miscommunication issue, but it's certainly also a lot of politics as well. But supposedly during this meeting, Senate President John Cullerton said the governor had indicated he was going to veto this bill that had actually passed back in June. And the Senate president went on to say, when pressed several times, that his understanding of the deal, it seems, was different than the understanding Republicans had of that. And the bill at issue is one that would have given $215 million to Chicago Public Schools. It's baked into their budget, money that they need, brings their pension. It basically has the state beginning to pay some of CPS teachers' pensions as it does for other school districts. And that, as I noted, passed. It was part of this stopgap agreement. And the governor was only going to sign it into law if the legislature passed a broader pension overhaul affecting all state employees, saving state government money. And we haven't seen that happen at all. Right. There's still time for that to happen. So that was Cullerton's point, both right after the leaders meeting and later on the floor when this became an issue that, we have time. We're working on it. Instead, right after that, in what appeared to be a sort of lashing out at Cullerton's statements and bother with what the Republicans saw as a breaking of their agreement, the governor vetoed it. In short order, the Senate went and overrode that veto. And again, the Senate president seemed to indicate that, in fact, there is a broad outline for what Rauner had wanted in this pension overhaul for the state, and said that he'll continue working with the governor. But I think that was a key takeaway for me, really, the lack of trust, and that will this set back those negotiations?
And here in the House, they didn't have the 71 votes that they needed. The Democrats didn't have those 71 votes that they needed to complete the override. So that $215 million for CPS is gone. That's a lot of money for a district that really, really needed it. And what was interesting today, I thought, was the timing of it. It was almost as if the governor's office, and they were probably following the video feed, heard Senate President Cullerton saying, well, we never thought that, there was never a hard and fast deal that we'd pass pension reform in exchange for his signature. We just thought it was, general talking. And, you do have to wonder, was this a misunderstanding on our part in the media? Because, boy, there were a lot of stories
about a deal
back in the summer that the deal had been made. And really...
and then you hear from Democrats, though, was the deal, okay, maybe that's what the condition was to have ensured a lack of veto, but there was always an opportunity for Democrats to override a veto. Nonetheless, by not doing that, you had, of course, as you noted, CPS is out $215 million, and that is significant for the state's largest school district and the children there, but also politically, of course, because you have a lot of Democratic senators and representatives from the city of Chicago, primarily Senate President John Cullerton himself and House Speaker Michael Madigan, of course.
Right. And really, the talk about pension reform, this is something that President Cullerton and the governor, I think, are in agreement on. This is a bill that President Cullerton was pushing, in 2012, 2013, and didn't go. He wants to take it up again.
The
He wants to,
consideration model.
right, and it's supposed to save $1 billion a year. And Rauner is very serious about, I'm not going to sign any, we're not going to do a stopgap budget, and we're not going to do a real budget unless you do some reforms. And I think this was probably one of his ways to strike back and say, guys, I'm serious about this. And then, of course, he and Speaker Madigan.
There's also a whole lot of politics. You already had, at the point in time when this passed, you had Republicans saying, hey, wait, this isn't a bailout. They were very careful to try and say that even though Republicans did put on votes on this measure that would have given CPS money, and really pension parity advocates say it's putting them on line, like I said, with other school districts, but Republicans said it's not a bailout because it is an exchange for this broader change. Taxpayers are benefiting from it no matter where you live. But then we saw today, as everything transpired, the Republican Party back again messaging this as a, quote, CPS bailout. So it's, I think, also very much, again, political, because you only have that one Republican legislator who represents any part of Chicago in the hard-fought battle. Republican Representative Mike McAuliffe is back. But other than that, you have legislators from the suburbs and downstate who already, and often you have voters in those areas thinking that Chicago gets too much of their money.
Right. Okay. So on the budget, we had that going on today after the budget talks. However, there was even more politics regarding the budget and that came yesterday when Speaker Madigan, kind of, I think to everybody's surprise, called a bill for a vote. It was a House resolution, not binding, but it put the House on record, House members on record, saying we will not vote for any tax increase during the January lame duck session. That's the 11-day session this year from January 1st to 11th, when it's only going to take a simple majority to pass bills to take immediate effect. The lame duck session is when bad things happen sometimes. That's when the infamous 2011 tax increase got passed. But now they've kind of painted themselves into a corner, I think, because now we know they can't vote on a tax increase during the lame duck session because they've voted on this resolution that they won't do that. So the temporary stopgap plan runs out on the 31st. No more spending authority. So now what do they do?
Illinois really is in another doomsday scenario, or at least rapidly approaching that when it comes to the budget. You could say that lame duck session is an opportunity when bad things happen, or maybe it's also the time where politicians do things that may not be politically expedient but are nonetheless necessary and make kind of hard choices that they couldn't do otherwise. There are a whole lot of arguments there. There is the argument that during the lame duck session you have lawmakers casting votes who aren't accountable to voters, but also, of course, voters elected them to full terms, and that is technically still their term. So, I mean, there's a whole lot there on the lame duck. I do think, however, that the takeaway, I was speaking with somebody who said, why would you cover that? That's just a symbolic vote. It doesn't matter. But I think it very much does matter. Normally, a resolution like that, you're right, who cares? It doesn't have the effect of law. But you're going to not have a legislator that wants a future career in politics voting for something like that and then turning around and voting for any sort of tax hike. So it really does take any hope of momentum or passage of a full budget agreement in the lame duck session from happening. And again, that's significant, not trying to advocate here for or against a tax increase, of course, but nonetheless, these working groups, the bipartisan set of legislators that had back in the spring come forward with a loose agreement of, okay, this is a way that we can go forward on a budget, did include tax increases in that proposal, and that's Republicans and Democrats alike.
Okay. We had one other major bill, and that just literally minutes ago, the Senate approved an Exelon bill pushed by Exelon and ComEd. It had been derided by a lot of people as simply a bailout for a very profitable billion-dollar generating company. However, I would imagine that right now in the Quad Cities and in Clinton, Illinois, where 2 nuclear plants are going to stay open if the governor signs this bill, you probably have a lot of people breathing easy now.
Breathing easy, maybe
4,000
clanging
employees.
beer steins. I believe I'd heard actually that Exelon already had meetings set up for tomorrow where they were going to announce news to their employees either way. So we know how that will go. It certainly is significant for these areas and economically, in areas that could use the economic boost or at least maintenance. But of course, it is going to be paid for by consumers. There's some that argue that Illinois consumers and customers of energy Energy would be paying more if these 2 nuclear plants in the Quad Cities were taken off the grid, because just supply and demand, there'd be less electricity for us to buy. But by and large, no, this is going to result in an increase in your bills. Nonetheless, it had the support not just of Exelon, and I think this is why you see, first of all, Exelon is the most energetic lobbying entity in the Capitol building. I think you could say Exelon and ComEd, they, of course, are separate companies, but they share a lot of things, let's say. And so, but also it's unions. It is these 2 areas. You had the Republicans that are on board with it because it's in their districts. The governor, once he gave assurances that he would sign it, also a lot of support from the renewable energy industry, because it does something that they've been asking for a while, and that is a fix of the renewable portfolio standard, and further some requirements that ComEd and Exelon, so again, paid for actually by consumers, but for energy efficiency.
Right, and this is a company that made $800 million profit in the last quarter, I think, and the irony is that some of the arguments that Exelon was using to keep these 2 plants open are exactly the arguments that they've used against building other power plants in the past. Energy bills tend to be just very complicated. They
suck up a lot of energy.
Yeah, they do. And we saw this week, this went through so many iterations. A lot of people complained that it was all being done last minute, but actually it had been months in the making. There were times that it felt like, boy, this is, it just felt very shaky. But
well, I mean, you've had critics say that what are legislators doing with energy rates? That is why Illinois has a Commerce Commission, a bunch of experts that do this. It is, on one hand, it's been in the works for literally years. And as you noted, the many iterations that came out, a 600-page bill that had 3 amendments added literally when it was on the floor. I guess I would say minutes before the vote, but really it was hours, because debate on the bill took hours in the House. But it is very complicated. You had a lot of legislators who know this inside and out that were still confused about exactly what was and was not in the legislation. So I think that speaks really to there's been a long relationship between Exelon and legislators. They do give a lot of money to political campaigns. Those are elements that we can't ignore, and I think that you would have many a business have a harder time getting this sort of thing through were it not for those connections. But again, it does more than just Exelon. You had the renewable support, so legislators who support the environment could get on board, and I guess a lot was still left off. You have still a lot of anger that coal was left out of it. It's huge. It's interesting, and I guess I would also add, Matt, the other frustration would be, and I think one of the storylines that this is, of course, significant, particularly if you're a worker in one of those areas or live even in the Quad Cities or near Clinton, because of all of the economic factors in the local economy there. But also, it is incredible that legislators and lobbyists and what have you worked around the clock to make this happen, and yet Illinois is, of course,
Meanwhile,
still
we have no budget.
without a budget.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, so a very exciting week here in the Capitol, and unfortunately, where the budget is concerned, they're going to continue to meet every day. The governor and the 4 leaders.
In a sense,
it's encouraging, but probably no real concrete signs of progress. So, Amanda, I really appreciate you coming on, and I should probably mention Amanda has been here in Springfield covering the Capitol for 10 years now. And if you're viewing in the Chicago area, you may have seen her from time to time on Chicago Tonight. You'll be seeing a lot more of Amanda on Chicago Tonight, because beginning when? January 1st?
January 3rd.
January 3rd.
Full-time.
She becomes full-time reporter for WTTW Channel 11. And we wish you the best, Amanda. We'll miss you down here in Springfield.
I'll be back.
You're
Still
back.
covering state government. Don't worry. I love this place. How could you not? It's beautiful, right?
Sure is. Well, that's it for this week's Only in Illinois. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Matt Dietrich, and we'll see you next week.